Jonathan Granoff.
Thank you. I think that some degree of praise is appropriate for the administration's forward position that they took during the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty PrepCom last week. And within 2 days of Rose Gottmaller's putting forward the U.S. position, an agenda was created for the review conference, an agenda that hadn't existed in 8 years. And that's really an accomplishment. And I think the administration deserves a great deal of credit for that. Now for the other side. Within a few days, General Chilton, on the other hand, came forward and said that the United States reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a cyber attack, which, you know, I see some hacker in the Bronx. This sort of challenge to the coherence of commitments that we've made in the Security Council and negative security assurances creates a problem. And this incoherence highlights the problem with the regime. We don't have a biological weapons convention that says that polio and smallpox are prohibited for everybody, but the plague is okay for 9 countries. It says it's no good for anybody. And the president has now put the principle forward. At what point will it be right to put forward the principle of a nuclear weapons convention, as the Indians have called for and the Chinese have called for, and say, how do we move toward a convention? Not that we can have one now, but how do we move toward a nuclear weapons convention?
I believe that we need to gain credibility by taking some steps, and there are a lot of steps that have to be taken. We talked at the White House yesterday about the various things that are on the front burner right now. We talked about the START Treaty. We talked about the importance of that and the verification provisions, and of course the Obama administration is working very closely with Russia on that. We talked about ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. In my view, that's going to be difficult. I wasn't there when they voted on that, but my impression is that they were ill prepared to vote. You had not had the hearings, you had not had the dialogue, you had not looked at the basic objections that were constructive objections. You had not thought through things like General Shalikashvili did post-mortem after the vote. I think the CTBT is going to have to be approached with a great deal of consideration for bipartisan leadership. I think it's going to be important that Senator McCain and Senator Lugar and others be brought in it. And I think that it'll be important to have some successes before then. I believe that the administration, we talked about the fissile material cutoff, making it verifiable. I found it puzzling during the previous administration that the Ronald Reagan trust but verify seemed to have been forgotten. He must have said it 1,000 times. I think we need to bring that back because verification and enforcement are all important, and Iran and North Korea are tests of the latter, enforcement. So all of those things have to be addressed, but we have to also prioritize. A series of successes perhaps will have to precede the CTBT vote. It's enormously important that vote not lose. Somebody's got to be able to count to 67 before they vote. The last time we didn't have good counters. So I think that's very important. It's a signal to the world. All of those things have to be on the front burner. One question, one point on the Chinese question earlier, and the convention, I think, has to come down the road. I think you have a convention when you have taken a lot of steps and there's a great deal more confidence than there is now, and you've dealt with some of the regional issues. You've got to deal with South Asia, Pakistan, India, Kashmir. You've got to deal with Northeast Asia. You've got to consider the Japanese and the overall extended deterrence. You've got to deal with Russia not being a part of any kind of Atlantic Euro security arrangement. All of those things have to be dealt with before a convention will be productive, in my view. Now, that doesn't mean 30 years or 40 years. It may be 5, it may be 10. I do not think you can set a time on it. One of the problems with the Non-Proliferation Treaty is you don't have benchmarks. You don't have steps. So the vision, the goal of a world without a nuclear weapon and the steps have to go together. And I would also echo what Bob just said about securing nuclear materials. We've got to secure them everywhere they are. Graham Allison wrote the book on it, but you secure them at the source. Once they leave the source, once highly enriched uranium's in the hands of terrorist groups, we are in the perfect storm. And so all of those things have to be done. On the Chinese, I think they have to join in this. I think even though they're not going to join, and neither are the other nuclear powers beyond Russia and the United States, in the first round of reductions. But I believe that they have to be part of the process, and there has to be some understanding by the U.S. and Russia when the other countries are going to join in, if we're going to move in that direction. I've said several times, and I'll close on this, that the Chinese, the last time I was briefed, this has been some time ago, so it may not be up to date, classified briefing. The Chinese did not even upload their missiles. They did not have their warheads and the missiles matched. We have thousands on prompt launch. I call it hair trigger. The military would object to that term, but nevertheless, the Russians do too. That means every day that goes by, every hour, we're depending on the Russian warning systems working for our existence and them not making a mistake. Every day that goes by, they're dependent on us. I've said that to President Putin. I've said it to President Medvedev. I've said it to President Bush, and I've said it to President Putin. Why can't we realize that it is in our interest for the Russian president to have more warning time before he has to decide whether to pull the trigger or lose his weapons? In my view, it's fundamentally in our interest to begin asking that question. It's fundamentally in the Russians' interest to ask that question in reverse, and then we need to ask it together. So yes, the Chinese have to be part of this, but it's probably going to be down the road, but not down the road before we start having conversations with them.